License and registration, please. Some of you know more about that than others. You know what that means. You're busted. Probably caught for speeding, maybe rolled through a stop sign. I can remember for some reason traveling home from church very late at night, getting pulled over and telling the officer that I've been at church. He didn't buy it. I don't know why. So I pulled out a business card. He shook his head and said, "All right, go ahead." But that doesn't happen very often, getting out of a ticket. My wife does much better than I do at that. But it's one of the ways we are identified. It's one of the ways we are identified. Driver's license, or our passport, or a social security card. Now they're developing facial recognition technology, fingerprints, and probably the granddaddy of them all, DNA. And believe it or not, we can go even further. Many have speculated about an Orwellian future complete with government-installed microchips that will positively identify us while containing pertinent information about us, like our medical records, credit card numbers, and criminal background. Orwellian or not, we've got to ask the question, do any of these forms of identification really say who we are? Can they impart the truth about our essence, the truth about who we are to our families and our friends and in God's eyes? In God's eyes, who are we? Because there's another facet to this. There's the facet that says we do want to be known, we want to be safe, and yet we're not always willing to do the things that require that. We want to be safe, so we understand the need for the occasional pat down at the airport, but we also want some level of privacy. That is at least our claim. But in reality, the privacy we desire is not just about keeping some information confidential. It's about our fear of being known only as an impersonal bucket of information. What we have to remember is that it is innately human to want to be understood, to want to be deeply known and intimately recognized. Parker Palmer, you may recognize that name, is a Christian author, educator, and a Quaker by tradition. Palmer tells the story of running across an old Quaker saying, "Let your life speak. Let your life speak." Over time, Palmer says he came to understand that for him, that saying meant, before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. Listen for what God intends to do with you. And I don't know about you, but I see far too many people who allow themselves to be almost totally defined by others. The voices of others tell them who they should be and what they should do. And these voices drown out their own voice and God's as well. Too many people allow their own identity to be almost completely conformed to the expectations of others. I know who these people are. I know who these people are because sometimes I am one of them, and probably you are too. This is not to say expectations are a bad thing. No, they're not. They're a good thing. It's just that allowing someone else's expectations to define you from the outside in is different from you taking on that expectation and making it your own and letting it mold you from the inside out. And if we're difficult to identify, and our lives are complex, just imagine how much more complex is Jesus' genuine identity. In our gospel reading from John, Jesus is on trial before Peter. The religious authorities have turned him over as a political prisoner. In this day and age of politics, we often have people resist studying, talking about politics and religion and saying they don't go together. Well, we wish they didn't, but they go together. Jesus is a political prisoner. The Jewish authorities have turned him over, claimed he is a political prisoner, and Pilate tries to get out at the truth, about Jesus by first accusing him of being a king, another political office. At least that was the charge the Jewish authorities had made when they handed him over. They did this knowing that the only kind of king Pilate would ever know, was Caesar. And if Jesus said he was a king like Caesar, well, then Pilate would have to act quickly and ruthlessly, because Jesus is not a king like Caesar and will not allow anyone else's definition of a king to be thrust upon him. That's why Jesus speaks so cryptically, to avoid being misidentified by Pilate's definitions and expectations. Jesus tells Pilate that his kingdom is not of this world, which seems to suggest that Jesus is a king. Pilate hops on the opportunity and says to Jesus, "So you are a king." But Jesus goes on, but Jesus won't go there. We are his readers and we hearers of the gospel know that Jesus is a king. That's nothing new to us. He is the King of Kings. But even that description is too limiting for Jesus under these circumstances. So Jesus tells Pilate, you say that I am a king. What Jesus is saying, in effect, is that that's the charge. It's laying before you. That's the charge. I know it is. But the world's understanding of a king just doesn't fit me. So Jesus declares, For this I have come into this world. For this I was born. For this I have come to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. And then, later we read Pilate's infamous statement that has traveled down through the centuries. Pilate asks sarcastically, "What is truth? What is truth? Now, did you catch our connection to the truth? Jesus does not so much define himself as he provides a way for us to define ourselves. Those of us who belong to the truth, listen to Jesus' voice. It's a fascinating statement, and it's loaded. For starters, it turns out our usual understanding of truth gets turned upside down. We usually think of truth as something that we have and hold. Something we have and hold, like a fact. Something we have and we hold. The truth is something along these lines that can be commanded. In this sense, truth is much more like a commodity that belongs to us, belongs to you, belongs to me. It's something we can command. But Jesus says we belong to the truth. The truth does not belong to us. The truth does not belong to us. In other words, our belonging to the truth defines us. And if we belong to the truth, if the truth characterizes our existence, then we hear Jesus' voice. We are in a relationship then with Jesus that allows us to know him truthfully. Now, if you haven't noticed by now, I have been scrupulously avoiding providing us with a simple definition of the truth. We're just not going to get one. Why? Because we don't get to define truth. Truth defines us. Truth defines us. What that means and how it gets translated into our lives involves the whole task of faithful life and living. Our lives are not meant to be simple, no matter how hard we try to simplify them. There is great depth and meaning to life, but in order to experience that depth and meaning, we must belong to the truth. We must have a relationship with the truth that shines in the darkness and becomes our identity. Truth, therefore, defines us, says who we are and whose we are. And truth becomes known to the world by the way we live our lives, by the way God works through you and me. We could even go so far as to say one significant way Christ is known is by the way we live truth. This leaves us in a potentially uncomfortable place. We would prefer a nice, tidy definition of truth, and we would prefer a simple good news statement that wraps everything up in a nice red bow, and we can put it on the shelf and forget about it. But no, that's not what we get this morning. No, this morning we're left with a challenge to belong to the truth, to be identified by the truth. We're left with the challenge to hear and discern Jesus' voice among all the others. We're left reflecting upon what the truth looks like when we let our lives speak. We're left wondering if we too have been born for this. We are left wondering if truth is just beyond truthiness. We're left wondering if this is what we have been born into, to testify, proclaim, declare the truth. Oh, glory be to Christ our King. Amen.